Hey guys, welcome back to Midweek Conversation. It's episode 5.
Yeah.
Episode 5 already. It's crazy. But thank you for joining us again. We want to thank you for sharing with your friends, with your family. We want to thank you for your feedback. It's been extremely encouraging because we just want to help in any way, shape, or form that we can. And so we are talking about different topics that you guys have asked about, you want to hear more about. And so we're going to jump into another one of those big topics, actually.
Yeah.
But before we do, as you can see, we have a guest with us again. This is going to be a guest that you should probably just get familiar with right away, but this is Layla Thornton. So welcome, Layla.
Thank you, guys. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah.
We are excited that you are here. And just for those of you that are not a part of the Bridge family, Layla is our student director, and she is doing some phenomenal things. And I mean that genuinely. That ministry has changed in pretty drastic ways. And it's really because of how God is using you in such a powerful way. It's so evident, so clear. And aside from what he's doing in and through you, I just want to personally say it has been a true joy and honor to be able to get to know you for one, be able to call you my friend and my sister, and it's a joy to do ministry with you. So thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. I could not agree anymore.
Yeah.
I've said it a million times, but yeah, I agree.
Well, Layla is, she's young, but has a ton of wisdom. And so that's why you're going to see more and more of her on this podcast because she has such a fresh perspective. But also is just so humble and wise, and so we're excited to do more and more of these with you. So let's get into today's topic.
Big topic today. So this is probably the biggest topic we were asked about.
Like most asked, yeah.
Most asked, in a variety of different ways. But we are going to talk about what the gospel is.
Yeah.
What is the gospel? It's a term that we throw out there a lot.
Yeah.
But what does it actually mean? What does it mean to us? And so I think maybe first and foremost, let's define what it is.
Yeah.
And so what does the gospel mean?
Yeah. So the word gospel, which we've heard a million times in English, comes from the Greek word euangelion.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah. The first part of that word eu, which is EU, is the word good in Greek. Angelion means news, or really more of an announcement or a proclamation. So it's a good announcement. And so I think the first way that we need to kind of tease this apart is I think when we say the word news these days, that can cause some confusion. Because in our culture, we have things like fake news, and we really don't have very many sources of unbiased news. So typically there's an agenda or, something like that. So I like the word announcement or proclamation better. I think that gets us closer into what we're talking about. Because when you hear like an announcement, the first thought isn't, is this true or not? The first thought is, how does this impact my life?
Yeah.
So for instance, like when my wife first told me that she's pregnant and we're going to have a kid, that announcement, my first reaction wasn't, is this true or not? My reaction is, how is this changing our lives now?
Yeah.
I mean, this is going to change everything.
Yeah.
We now have a new person in the family and we have to prepare for this and be equipped for it, right?
In an exciting way, right?
Yeah. Well, maybe. But that's more of the idea of what we're trying to get at with this word euangelion. The other thing is euangelion means good news or announcement, not good advice. And I think this is another place that we need to get some clarification. We're not giving people advice.
Yeah.
We're giving people an announcement that has changed everything. So like for you, Layla, if I were to call you tomorrow morning and I were to say to you, hey, I think you should go out and get yourself a nice home. Go buy yourself a house and get some furniture. Get that bad boy looking exactly how you would like it. Get yourself a new car, and then whatever it is that you want to spend on, go for it, and then put some aside and save for your future. If I were to hang up the phone, you would receive that as advice, and
Sure.
you would have to determine what you're going to do. You would consider some things. You would also probably be thinking like, where are these resources coming from, right? Like, but it's advice, and you have to determine what you're going to do with that advice. However, if I called you tomorrow morning and I said, hey, I just heard the announcement that you've won the lottery.
Whoa.
You now have hundreds of millions of dollars in your bank account. And then I just hung up the phone. You're receiving that completely different. Like something has happened that has
Yes.
changed everything.
Yes.
So maybe I will get the new house and the new car, but the bottom line is that something has changed. And it's the same way with the gospel. I think so often we talk to people about Jesus and we treat it as advice. Like we say things like, Jesus is the best thing that could ever happen to you. And he'll give you freedom and he'll give you healing. And people are then left to consider this offer of advice. And then they're often thinking, well, how am I going to get healing? And how will I be saved? I don't even know what that means. But if instead you share the good announcement that God came in flesh and he ushered in his kingdom of healing and restoration and wholeness and has invited you into that, then they're left to respond and determine how this has changed everything for their lives. So I just think those are some points of clarification.
Yeah, it's so good. I love thinking of it as an announcement too, because when you think of it in your own life, if I have an announcement, I'm going to tell everybody. Like, I have something good that I'm going to announce to the world. And that's a good perspective to have as to what we are to do with the gospel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in all seriousness, a lot of times it does come with a lot of an excitement.
Yeah.
Like you want people to hear this new news, this announcement of something that's new and fresh.
Yeah.
And I love that because it then stirs something inside of you.
Absolutely.
Kind of like you're saying, I love the differentiation between advice, because advice is kind of like, do what you want with it.
Right.
This is something has drastically changed where you now have to, decide what you're going to do with that.
Yeah. Something has happened that has changed everything.
Yeah.
And I need you to know about it.
Right.
Yeah.
I think of when we have advice, we can get in the perspective of like, should I keep this to myself? It's not my place to tell everyone.
Yeah,
like
that's good.
they don't need to hear my advice because they have their
That's
own
good.
way of doing things. But when we have an announcement, it's like, hey, everyone, listen to this. I have something. And it like almost demands for attention. Like I have something to announce to you.
Yeah, I
While
thought about
advice,
that. Sorry,
No, you're
I
fine.
thought about that when he was sharing that advice with you. Like you could even be thinking to yourself, like, who
Dustin,
is he to
who are you?
like whatever,
Yeah.
this is my life. What are you talking about? Yeah.
Yep.
So I guess then what does that mean in our context, right? So the gospel is a good announcement. What does that mean in our context as believers now? How would you even start to kind of now say good announcement, and this is what that biblical good announcement looks like?
Well, can I ask you maybe a follow-up to that?
Sure.
Because I think this might get us in the right direction. I'm curious, maybe you've grown up in the church your whole life.
Yeah.
You've probably heard the word gospel literally thousands of times.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, maybe throughout your experience, what you thought the gospel was or how that was framed up for you throughout your life. I'm curious to hear what that looks like.
Yeah. It was a progression over time. And it started with Jesus came to this earth, was born into this earth, and he went to a cross, died on that cross so that my sins could be forgiven. And honestly, it kind of stopped there. For many, many years of my life, it kind of stopped there. And it became all about like, my sins are forgiven, Lord, please forgive me. And it was this very limited perspective of my faith. It was very limited in that, okay, he's saved me, and now, I'm just waiting for him to come and bring me home to heaven, right? Like that was, most of my Christian walk was that.
Yeah.
And I forget at what point, honestly, at this stage of it, that I then thought, oh, you know what? The resurrection is kind of a big piece of this. And so he did raise from the grave. He conquered death. And, reading the Bible, it's like, yeah, the power of that resurrection is now with us, available to us. The Holy Spirit comes to empower us. And so it was like the cracking of the door of, hang on, there's more to what I am doing now as a follower of Christ than just sitting here and waiting for him to return and bring me to heaven.
Yeah.
So heavy emphasis on the cross and the price that was paid for our sin, with maybe an add-on of the resurrection. Would that be fair for your experience as well?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I too would say, like, I couldn't even give you that response, like the cross and the death and resurrection coming later, until way later into my walk with the Lord. Like, I heard the word, the gospel, forever. I grew up in the church. Like, I vividly remember being in like elementary school and hearing the term the gospel for the first time, but I couldn't tell you what it was. Like, I wouldn't even know to say that the cross and the resurrection and like Jesus's life fell into what the gospel was until later.
You saying that made me think, it wasn't but a handful of years ago, for the first time in my life, I actually sat down and thought about, what is the language that I would use to share the gospel with someone? We throw these terms around all the time, but I didn't actually sit down, spend the time to actually put like pen to paper of like, what would I actually say is the gospel? So sorry that, and I don't know how true that is for many followers today, to actually spend the time of thinking about what that actually looks like and how we would actually articulate that.
Yeah, I would say a lot, actually. Like, that's pretty accurate for where a lot of people are at. We just did a series in Bridge students over what is the gospel, and I got lots of feedback from parents of them coming back and be like, my kids are teaching me something, and their parents have grown up in the church, but it's so thrown around that there's like, what is it? But I don't think it's because people are intentionally not thinking about it. I don't think there hasn't been space and time to sit down and like, okay, I've been taught these things for so long, but how would I step into that?
Well, then let's talk about what the actual gospel is. We've talked about the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus. And I think we would all agree that's the culmination of the biblical story, therefore the culmination of the good announcement. But I think, especially as Christians, we often just kind of stop there and almost put the gospel in a little bubble of its own. And we don't realize the whole story that leads up to that, and then the story that proceeds beyond that, all of which is essential to the announcement that we're trying to tell people about.
Let's dive into that then. So that's been the bubble, like you said, and I agree with that 100%. So let's try to give more of the whole story. So let's go back kind of to the beginning of the book, the Bible, to fill in, where we've left out. So where would we start when we look back to the Old Testament of framing the full story?
Yeah, I think we go all the way back to the beginning, right? We see the narrative around Adam and Eve. And what we ultimately see here is this beautiful picture of the way God intended things to be, right? Over and over again, he says that it was good. When he creates mankind, it was very good. And so what we see here is God as the ultimate creator in harmony with his image bearers, living together and dwelling together and the way things are supposed to be. But then, of course, we see the problem comes into the picture, and we see this chasm, this separation between God and mankind, and God and the cosmos, the creation in general. And so that sets off a journey of the biblical story, which is, how is God going to bring it back to the way it was intended to be, right? How is he going to bring everything in unity and harmony? And what we find out early on in the story is that this is going to happen in and through a human, right? And so that story begins with Abram, or Abraham, God makes a covenant, and he says, you will be the one through whom the blessing will go out. That, of course, gets passed down to his descendants, his family line. And, of course, they fail miserably. And it's frustrating to read how much and how often they're failing in this ultimate vocation of theirs. And so then we begin to see more and more Messiah language. Somebody is going to come about to do this. A human will show up and will accomplish this ultimate restoration. And of course, that's when the bubble of the Jesus narrative comes into play. But what you have through the Old Testament story is this huge crescendo, this climax where somebody's coming about who's going to accomplish the biblical narrative.
Right.
And then that's when Jesus comes into the picture.
Yeah.
I think that's why the Old Testament, is so crucial, because it all is directly pointing to the New Testament. We're going through the New Testament, you can't understand half of it if you don't know what's going on in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
I think that's a crucial point that you've just made. And that is, you cannot understand who Jesus is and what he's actually accomplishing without deeply understanding the Old Testament narrative. It's just not going to make sense to you.
True.
And that's the work that our gospel writers are trying to do, and the heavy lifting that Paul is trying to do, to ultimately bring all these things to our attention to show just how much Jesus has accomplished and what it, of course, now means for us.
The amount of times Paul will point back to what he fulfilled in the Old Testament.
It's amazing.
Is over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But that is completely leading and pointing to Jesus, the Lamb, the blood, the on and on and on, the sacrifice that they had to make, and the tabernacle. I mean, it's all just pointing to the Messiah to come.
Yeah. The Exodus narrative, the walking through the sea narrative. I mean, all of it. It's just this huge arrow pointing to the Messiah. It's a beautiful thing.
Which to me, it helps when I have any doubt. Looking at the Old Testament, I'm like, oh, well, shoot, this has got to be true because look at all this. I don't know, it just helps with that side of things too.
Yeah. Now, I do, as we're talking about the kind of pre-story, so to speak, I do want to call out a few things that are important specifically to this idea of the gospel, euangelion. I want to make a couple of things clear. We talk about how important context is. So when the gospel writers start using the word gospel, a few things that are important to note. And the first thing is that from the Jewish lens, as they're reading the Old Testament, their Hebrew scriptures, there's a really important narrative where they're getting this word from. And that is, at one point in the story, we see that the family line of Abraham goes into exile. So this is one of those points where they go into oppression and slavery, right? And so they have this power that is over them, that is putting them in chains, so to speak. And a gospel comes along through the prophet Isaiah that says that God is going to overcome that enemy, Babylon, and that he is going to free his people, and that they're going to go back to their homeland where God will return as king. So this is one of the key narratives that's happening that the gospel writers are going to pick up on to point to the person of Jesus. And we'll have to reflect on that, okay? Another piece of context is in the first century world, we talk a lot about this, but the Roman Empire is dominating, Caesar is king. And so throughout the line of the Roman emperors, this word gospel was always used to represent the emperor. In other words, the emperor is ultimately the one who's going to change everything. He's going to bring about prosperity and peace, and therefore this is the one that you look to put your trust in and to put your hope in. All of these ideas are wrapped up into Caesar. This is the one. And yet again, the gospel writers are going to pick up on that narrative and they're going to point it to the person of Jesus. So these are some of the specific things happening historically with this word euangelion that the gospel writers and Paul are going to apply to the work of Jesus.
Great. That's great. So I think that hopefully gives us that pre-story, as you alluded to. Hopefully that's triggering a lot of folks of some of the language that they've read through the Old Testament that's pointing to Jesus the Messiah. And I think the explaining of the gospel that we've done thus far, we've kind of covered the bubble part, the Jesus part, where, came life, death, resurrection. And so we've covered that. Now let's maybe go beyond that of what we see, what we read with the first church, with Paul's letters and writings, and what that now looks like to round out the whole picture. So what immediately jumps to mind when we start looking kind of post-resurrection?
Well, just to bring it back to the narrative, you have this crescendo, somebody's coming who's going to bring about restoration and wholeness. We find out that through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, he accomplishes that.
Yeah.
So the good announcement has happened. It's to be spread about. So then the whole rest of the New Testament becomes about how we respond to that in a good and right way. What we do now in light of the new king of the cosmos and the kingdom that has been ushered in. That's what the whole New Testament is about.
Well, I think the big thing that I've more recently come to grips with is the ushering in of his kingdom. That I've always called him king, I've always called him Lord, but that he has ushered in now his kingdom. And it's like I've gone about it in a way where it's like, I know I'm supposed to live the way he taught. Jesus taught and showed us the proper way to live as followers of him. But I think I missed the connection for so long of that is the ushering in of his kingdom versus just I want to be a good person that, and I'm following his ways. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So maybe what does kingdom mean? Like when you say that word, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's what we point to as our future promised land, heaven, paradise of all things being restored, right? So we mentioned death and sin, new creation being a place where that doesn't exist. Now, obviously, we are still in this earth and we live in a broken earth. But the fact that since he has now been resurrected and sits at the right hand of the Father, reigning over all, he has now started and launched off his kingdom, and the start of bringing on that full restoration of the things that we messed up going back to the beginning of the story. So his kingdom of peace and his kingdom of joy and his kingdom of blessing, that is what I'm referring to when I say his kingdom.
Yeah.
It's of all of the good that he originally created at the beginning.
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but as we're talking about like the new kingdom and it being here and now, it almost like it gives me visuals of like going back to the Old Testament, how he was going to fulfill the plan through a human. Like it was giving an opportunity and originally, or in the end, it came through Jesus, the Messiah. But like now we are still his image bearers. Mm-hmm. We still have a job to be done here and now. So in the in-between of the current kingdom and the kingdom that is to come, we are to, we say it all the time, your kingdom come, your will be done right now, like here and now on earth as it is in heaven. We are still the image bearers that are to be the ones to drive it through and like to be the ones to fulfill that here and now.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Absolutely.
That's 100%. That now becomes our purpose.
Right.
We become a people who take on the purpose of Christ, who is the ultimate restorer. And so we are to spread the reign of Jesus. So wherever Jesus rules and reigns, wherever peace and love and joy are pervasive, that's his kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
So our job is to spread that.
Absolutely.
That's the whole idea, that we're spreading that rule and reign. So we are to be peacemakers, right? We are to be the light of the world. We are to be generous and share everything with all people. We are to seek justice and take care of those who are poor and needy or marginalized and oppressed. All of these things are how we spread the rule and reign of Jesus to bring his kingdom to earth.
Yeah.
Which I think sparks questions of like, how do we do that? Everything you just said just displays Jesus. Like if you want to know how to do that, walk in the ways of Jesus. And I swear I'm not trying to like give plugs to the Ephesians series, but I'm learning so much in that. And it's just making me think of like his inheritance is ours. If we are in Christ, we are now in him, meaning, everything that entails him, like in himself.
Yeah.
So now that means we're walking in the ways of Christ. We are acting in the ways, we are following the teaching and the life. And that is how we bring his kingdom to earth. That's how we fulfill the kingdom here and now.
Yeah. Yeah, I have this like visual in my head of, we were referring back to the Old Testament and the tabernacle and how God's presence resided in that Holy of Holies. And it was like that was the bright spot, the light in this dark world. That's where it was excluded to, like isolated to this one spot. And when Jesus died, that veil was torn, and how his presence is now living in us. We are his temple, the replacement of that tabernacle, that temple. And so then I think about, as we are who he's created us to be, and as we live out as he has taught us to, I now envision that bright light being from this isolated place to everywhere that we walk. And so we're in this dark place, but everywhere that we are walking, that we bring this light. And we read about that in scripture too, all throughout the New Testament. But I have like a visual of that where it's like, that's what we are to do. That's who we are to be. That's what we're supposed to be living in.
Yeah.
Yeah. To bring it back to the gospel, what we're saying is when we share the announcement that Jesus is king, what that now means is that we live in a reality where people forgive one another and where people make peace with one another, and they share freely with one another, and they think of others above themselves. Does that make sense? We're sharing the news that this is now the good and right reality, and this is what you are to live in. This is how you are to treat people. This is how your focus should be. And so that's what we mean when we say that we're sharing the gospel and spreading the good announcement.
Right. And too, we're doing that amongst a culture that is so anti that.
Right.
Like you're doing that, you're walking in the ways of like kingdom culture in a culture that is very anti-kingdom culture.
Yeah. Yeah. I know we're probably belaboring this, but I just think so often we'll throw out phrases like, we want to bring your kingdom to earth. And I just want it to be clear. Like when you forgive somebody who has done you wrong, you're bringing his kingdom to earth.
Yes.
Right? When you share something with somebody, even if it's at your own detriment, you're bringing God's kingdom to earth.
Absolutely.
Right? All of these little things that we think about, as we walk in them and as we spread them, we're literally bringing the rule and reign of Jesus to earth.
That is the connection point that I was saying I feel like I was missing. Was I always viewed that as just being a kind thing to do. But it's actually ushering in his kingdom to this earth.
Yeah, and I think too, that's how a lot of times we read the Bible. We'll read the New Testament, Paul's letters, and we'll think about them as like a rule book or an ethics book to make us better people. No, not at all. Paul is teaching us how to bring God's kingdom to earth, how to be a people who truly spread the announcement that Jesus is king.
Go ahead.
Which I want to hang out here for a second, because I think like when we understand the gospel, I think there are a lot of people that are like, okay, I want to be image bearers of this. I want to produce more of that. Like I want to share this with everyone. But that first step is super exciting. But then the things that get harder, like, oh wait, now I have to live that out or carry that out. That is what you're doing. Scripture says they will know that you are my disciple. They will know that you are following this good news or this gospel, this story of Jesus, if you love one another. How we do that is what we're displaying. Those acts of little kindness or the acts of carrying his kingdom to like fulfilling his plan here on earth.
Yeah.
That is how we share it. Yeah. Like, it's so practical and it's so simple, but it's true. That's how you do it.
I'm so grateful you just used the word love, because this is yet another thing. We look at the great commandment and we think Jesus is telling us how to be a good person. No, what he's saying is, if you want to bring my kingdom to earth, you will love your neighbor as yourself. Yeah. You will be a person who gives out generous, self-giving love to other people in everything that you do. And in that, you're literally bringing my good kingdom to this reality.
It's great. And again, I don't want to breeze past this, because these are things, as far as when we talk about being forgiving and we talk about bringing peace, these are things that are easy to say.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm thinking of situations or a situation that I've very recently walked through. And I'm talking about, when we talk about forgiving and bringing peace, many times it comes in a way that is very, very difficult for us, because you mentioned the culture.
Yeah.
We too have been grown up, raised in, experienced that same culture. So what kind of comes natural for us is the culture, right? And so when someone treats us unfairly, we, because of the culture, want to stand up to them and fight them about whatever that is. No, that's not fair.
Right.
You should be fair. And so I'm going to stand firm here. Yeah. And so bringing peace instead in that situation is saying, you know what? I see past, whatever my hang up is with it. When I want to say, you know what, by golly, that's not fair to me, I'm still going to say, you know what, I care more about, you and a relationship with you and bringing peace to this situation, that I'm going to cower down. I'm going to be truly selfless in this situation to see that there is a bigger picture, and it's an ushering in of his kingdom.
Let me cut in here for a moment, because this is really important. We're using the words kingdom. And I want us to understand, even going back to the first century world, if you are going to usher in a kingdom, well, then you have to take that by force. You have to have the best military, right? You're going to come in, and frankly, if violence is needed, then violence is what we spread. Whatever is needed to usher in my rule and reign in my kingdom, that's what we're going to have to do. And yet Jesus comes in, and he ushers in his kingdom by submitting himself, being beaten and whipped and disgraced and spit upon, and being nailed to a cross, and in which he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This is the way in which he brings in his kingdom. And going back to us being his and being like him and carrying on his purpose, I just want to keep pointing to the fact that's how we bring in his kingdom, is through humility and through forgiveness and just trying to ensure that everybody knows that we are going to be out for their best interest, no matter what the situation is. Like it's an unbelievable thing to reflect upon.
I love that you said the word humility, because, oh gosh, I feel like I am in a season of being humbled like day after day, but it's a good thing. Like, it's painful, but it's a good thing, because that is the way of his kingdom. But I just listened to something by Sadie Robertson, and she said it's her and her husband, like between them, they have a saying in their house: am I so willing to be right with someone that I'm willing to have that relationship be on wrong terms? Do I want to be so right in an argument that I'm fine being bad with that person, or like being in bad terms? And that just made me think of what you're saying. Like the way of God's kingdom is so different than the kingdom here, meaning our culture that we grow up in and that we're like raised up in. But so much of it goes back to humility, and so much of it goes back to putting that person above yourself.
Yeah. And you guys keep using the word culture. I would replace that with kingdom, meaning you're serving one or the other, right?
Yeah, that's
you're
good.
either serving and living in the kingdom of this culture, or you're serving and living in the kingdom of Jesus, right?
Yeah, I was reading in the beginning of Acts, you know, this jumped out because of the conversation we're having. But when Jesus is resurrected and he's like, I'm about to go for real, you know, like it's this is it. They responded by saying, is it at this time you are restoring the kingdom? And I would have thought, is it time that we're going to heaven? You know, but instead, the thought process that they were having is the kingdom language versus what we tend to jump to with our heavenly language. And so that just jumped out to me, that how their minds were really working at that time frame. Are you restoring the kingdom was what they first jumped to.
Yeah, I do want to call out that there are a couple of times specifically in Paul's letters where he uses the word gospel, and then he goes on to talk about what it means. And what's really neat is he does always make the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus core to what he's sharing. So I know earlier we talked about how we usually just keep it in that bubble. I don't want to minimize that.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that is the culmination of the story.
Absolutely.
That's where everything happens. But even when Paul shares that, he always roots it in the story that leads up to it. He always talks about according to the scriptures or something in that way to root it in who Jesus really is and what he actually accomplished.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because I do feel like really through most of our conversations, we're trying to bring to light maybe a piece that we're not seeing as much, and that being more of the kingdom side of it and what that means for us, that we are truly to step into that and usher that in. That is not to minimize
at all.
not to minimize the gospel of, you know, Jesus' life, death, and resurrection by any shape of the imagination there. So yeah, thank you for clarifying that, for sure. So anything else to add as far as the New Testament story that we're walking through now post-resurrection?
Yeah, I think what's really cool is to build up. We see the life, we see the resurrection, we see it all. We now have this mission that we're on to be doing something in the here and now. And it ultimately ends with God is going to restore. He's going to come through with his original design. We're going to end up where he started things. There's more to this gospel story. Like, this was God's plan from the very beginning, and he fulfilled it through Jesus. He's going to ultimately fulfill it in his new creation.
Yeah, that's great.
No, I love that, because in the narrative, you have the way it was intended to be. The end of the story is the way that it was intended to be. And everything we've been talking about is kind of in the middle. And where we're at in the story is that Jesus has already accomplished it.
Right.
And yet we're partnering with him to ultimately bring about the full fulfillment of that, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, like what I was saying about Acts, you know, Jesus' response is like, well, the Holy Spirit's coming to help you out from here, you know? So, it's for us to step into to bring that. Yeah,
which is cool to think like that is what we're working towards, to bring things back to the way they were intended to be, which means full restoration, wholeness, a kingdom that is truly full of love and joy and peace. All right, guys. Well, it's time for the fun segment, We're ready for this. All
Yes.
right, Layla, it's your first time.
The pressure's on.
So you get to jump into the waters here.
Yep.
And so next week is Halloween, right? I think it'll be next Thursday?
Yeah.
So what we wanted to do is do a draft of our favorite candy.
Okay.
All right. Very relevant, very applicable.
All right.
And here's the thing. Any and all candy is on the board. So it doesn't matter, sour, fruit, chocolate, all that stuff. It's on the board. So why don't we go ahead and give Layla the first pick since she's the guest, and then we'll do the typical snake draft. We'll do 3 rounds.
Okay.
So make sure you do this well, all right?
Yeah.
And the pressure's on.
This is serious.
Yeah.
This is
All right.
serious. Number 1 overall pick, favorite candy.
Okay. Easy for me. And they're limited. They're limited edition. You don't see them often, all right? The caramel apple suckers.
Okay? Okay.
Did you expect
Wow.
that?
Did not expect
All
that.
right.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
And that is
Yeah.
especially this time of
Yeah.
year.
Yes,
that's a good call.
and that's
Yeah.
why it's like something like look forward to. Like, oh yes.
I'm not a green apple fan, so I will respectfully disagree.
Man, the
All
past few
right.
years, I've jumped into the green apple thing.
like it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And covered with caramel.
Come on.
I get it.
I'm
I'm
there.
on board with the caramel.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to start off with good old Sour Patch Kids. I think that probably is my favorite candy. Now, typically, if I'm going after candy, I'm going to crave more of the fruity stuff than the chocolate, just because it's not quite as heavy or rich.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I can eat more of it.
Uh-huh.
But what I like about Sour Patch Kids, it's a little bit sour, but not overbearing.
True.
But then you have all the different flavors. So there's variety. Blue raspberry is my favorite.
Okay.
But I like the variety. And you can eat it on road trips and movie theater, all that stuff. So
Yeah.
that's my number 1.
It's good.
I like me some Sour Patch Kids too. But my favorite are the Nerd Clusters.
Yeah.
All
The
right.
Nerd Clusters are highly addictive.
Very.
Admittedly. It's a problem, but they're so good.
Yeah.
So that's my number 1.
Solid.
I too, it depends on my mood with like the fruity versus the chocolatey, but I'm probably in the mood for fruity more often.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go with the chocolate. I'm going to take a chocolate as well.
Okay.
So my second pick, I'm going to go with not Reese's, which has been
Wow.
my favorite for a long time. I've changed. Twix. Twix. I am obsessed with some Twix. So my kids' bags of candy are going to get light on the Twix.
You ever put it in the freezer? You ever
Yes.
tried that?
Whoa.
Yeah.
Do you
Have
like
you had
that
the
or
ice
not
cream
like
one?
that? Yeah, I think so.
So good.
You've told me about
They're
this.
so
You told-
Yeah. I respect Twix,
Uh-huh.
but I'm for sure taking Reese's.
Okay.
Can't believe
I mean-
that's still on the
Yeah,
board.
they're great.
It's, to me, the best chocolate candy by a mile.
Wow.
And I do like not the original Reese's, but the different shapes, like the holiday
I agree.
special stuff.
Yes.
Agreed.
The ratio of chocolate to peanut butter is ideal.
Agreed.
And you talk about addictive. I mean,
Yep.
once you start popping those bad boys,
Uh-huh.
it's impossible to stop.
Yep.
So yeah, that's an easy selection.
There you go.
Good. That's good. Okay, I am definitely the chocolate side.
Okay.
If I want something sweet, I'm not going fruity necessarily. So I'm going to go with Heath.
Heath.
Oh,
Yes.
I love it.
Good.
I love it.
Yeah.
Those are good.
Those
I
are good.
respect
Good
that.
call.
Yeah.
Good call.
And
Yep. Okay, yes.
Last pick.
Definitely more chocolatey, but my third one has to be something fruity.
Uh-huh.
I'm going with the cherry Twizzlers and the bite size,
Yeah.
not
Okay.
the ropes, the bite
Yeah.
size. They're good.
yeah,
Yeah.
I respect that. I'm not a big Twizzler fan in general.
Well, the ropes, not a huge
Yeah.
fan. The bites are
They're good.
much better.
And cherry,
Yeah.
not strawberry.
Yeah, so I
Yeah,
agree.
I'm just not a strawberry candy girl at all.
Really?
At all.
Normally, I think I like strawberry more, but I prefer cherry and the Twizzler.
Yeah, the cherries are good.
Cherry, I'm learning, is polarizing because people think that it has a medicinal flavor
Oh, yeah.
from the medicine that we grew
That's
up on.
unfortunate.
Yeah.
But I love it.
Yeah.
I think it's
Tara
fantastic.
is one of them.
Yeah. All right, last pick for me. And gosh, so many that I am bouncing around in my head right now. But I think I'm going to finish up with Carmelo. That's a classic for me. And admittedly, there's nostalgia involved. I remember when we were kids riding our bikes up to the gas station. That was always the candy of choice. And then you're eating it on the way back and just the caramel's like falling down your chin. Ah, the best.
I'm just picturing this right now.
Yeah.
They're so simple, but so good.
So good.
I'm realizing I have a problem, guys. All of these sound amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go with the hot tamales.
Oh,
Whoa.
Throwing cinnamon in.
I like it.
I'm throwing some cinnamon in the game.
I like it.
Didn't see that coming.
I love cinnamon things in general.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hot tamales. I like them a lot.
What's interesting with hot tamales is I never crave them. And even if somebody offers them, I don't really have any interest. The second I eat one of them, I'm like, all right, give me the hot
Give me
tamales.
the rest of the box.
Yeah.
Yeah, hot tamales. I'm strong draft.
Yeah,
I mean, all of them, I'm like, yes.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining in and listening. I know we had a great time recording, so I hope you guys enjoyed what we brought as much as we did.
Yeah, and make sure to like, subscribe, share, comment, and hit the bell, right? To put on your post notifications so that you can be notified when the next one gets dropped. But thank you so much for doing that and sharing it.
And also one other call out. We will always have a form within our YouTube page to where you can send in additional questions that we can cover.
Yeah.
Or maybe if you just have a follow-up question on one of the episodes that we're putting out. And then we're going to have ways to communicate on Facebook and Instagram as well to just keep the conversation going, because that's the whole reason we're doing this. So we love you guys. Can't wait to hear more from you, and we'll catch you next time.
Love you.